It was 11:38 on a Tuesday night when my phone buzzed with another message from my supervisor. I'm Amanda Chen, 26 years old, and I'd been working as a junior marketing coordinator at Vanguard Creative in downtown Denver for 8 months. 8 months of finally living my dream after years of unpaid internships and freelance gigs that barely covered rent. I loved my job. Loved the clients, the campaigns, the creative energy. But that night, staring at my phone screen in the dark of my bedroom, I felt my stomach turn. Another photo. Another message I never asked for. Jake Morrison, my direct supervisor, senior account manager, 34 years old and married with a baby on the way. The photo was worse than the last one. More explicit. More undeniable. And underneath it, a message asking what I thought. Whether I liked what I saw. Whether I wanted to see more. I deleted it immediately, like I'd deleted the dozens before it. Told myself it would stop. That if I just ignored him, he'd get bored and move on. That reporting him would mean losing everything I'd worked for. But what I didn't know that night, what I couldn't have imagined, was that my silence was protecting a predator who'd been doing this for years, and that the person who'd helped me stop him was someone I'd been too scared to tell. In the next 25 minutes, you'll discover how a family connection I thought would complicate everything became the key to exposing a pattern of abuse that had destroyed careers, how an internal investigation would uncover dozens of victims, and how fighting back would cost me friendships but give me something more valuable than any promotion. Justice. I'd graduated from UC Boulder 3 years earlier with a degree in marketing and communications. Moved to Denver because that's where the opportunities were, where agencies actually hired people without 5 years of experience. I'd worked 2 terrible internships, one at a startup that folded after 6 months, another at a corporate firm where I made coffee and filed paperwork for 9 months straight. Then I'd freelanced, picking up whatever I could. Social media management for local restaurants, content writing for wellness blogs, graphic design for small businesses. I made maybe $28,000 that year, lived in a studio apartment in a sketchy neighborhood, ate ramen 4 nights a week, wondered if I'd made a huge mistake thinking I could build a career in a field where everyone wanted experience but nobody wanted to give you a chance to get it. Then Vanguard Creative posted an opening, junior coordinator position, entry level but with real responsibilities, managing client communications, coordinating campaign timelines, supporting the creative team, $45,000 a year, benefits, actual vacation days. I applied thinking I had no shot. 100 people probably wanted that job. But somehow, I got an interview, then a second interview, then an offer. I cried when I got the call. Actually cried. Because it felt like validation. Like maybe I wasn't wasting my life chasing something impossible. I gave notice at my freelance gigs, found a better apartment, bought professional clothes that didn't come from Target. I showed up on my first day ready to prove I belonged there. Jake Morrison was my supervisor. He managed a team of 4 coordinators, reported directly to the director of client services. He seemed great at first. Friendly, approachable, always willing to answer questions. He'd worked at Vanguard for 6 years. Knew every client, every process. He took me to lunch my first week, explained office politics, told me who to watch out for and who had my back. He said I was doing great, that I was a fast learner, that I'd go far if I kept it up. I was grateful, relieved. I'd heard horror stories about terrible bosses and toxic agencies. Jake seemed like the opposite, like someone who actually cared about his team. The first inappropriate message came 2 months in. Late on a Friday night. I was home, watching TV, decompressing after a long week. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake. Not through the work messaging system, but to my personal cell. He'd gotten my number from the employee directory. The message was casual. Asked what I was up to. Said he was bored, wife was asleep, wondering what people our age did for fun on weekends. It felt weird, but not alarming. Maybe he was just being friendly. I responded politely, said I was watching a show. He asked which show. I told him. He said he loved that show too, that we should watch it together sometime. I didn't respond to that. Let the conversation die. Figured it was nothing. But then it happened again, and again. Always late at night, Always personal questions that had nothing to do with work. What was I wearing? Was I seeing anyone? Did I go out much? Had I ever been to this bar or that club? I kept my responses short, professional, tried to redirect to work topics, but he'd just pivot back, start complimenting me, saying I was smart, talented, attractive, saying he'd noticed me, that I stood out, that I had potential but needed guidance, that he could help me advance if I trusted him. The subtext was clear but deniable, just vague enough that I couldn't point to any one message and say this crosses a line, but the pattern was obvious. He was testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push before I pushed back. Then the photos started. 3 months into the job. A Saturday afternoon. My phone buzzed. A photo from Jake. I opened it thinking maybe it was work-related. A client presentation or campaign draft. Instead, it was a photo of him. Shirtless. At the gym. Flexing. The caption said he'd been working out. Asked what I thought. I stared at my phone. Heart pounding. This was different. This was undeniable. I didn't respond. Didn't know what to say. Didn't want to make it worse by acknowledging it. But ignoring it didn't stop him. The next week, another photo. This time at his house. Casual clothes, suggestive pose. Then another. Each one more explicit than the last. Photos I absolutely did not ask for, did not want. That made me feel sick and scared and trapped. I stopped responding entirely. But that didn't matter. He kept sending them. Once a week. Twice a week. Sometimes in the middle of the night. Sometimes during work hours when I was sitting 3 desks away from him. And at the office, he acted completely normal. Professional, friendly, like nothing was happening outside of work. That's what made it so disorienting. I'd get a graphic photo at midnight, then see him at 9 a.m. in a staff meeting acting like my supportive boss. He'd praise my work in front of the team, give me high-profile assignments, tell everyone I was his star coordinator. Nobody knew, nobody suspected, and I couldn't figure out how to tell them without sounding crazy. How do you explain that your boss who seems so great is actually harassing you through text messages nobody else can see? I thought about reporting it. Thought about it constantly. Vanguard had HR, had a handbook with harassment policies, but Jake was well-liked, successful. He brought in major clients, had great relationships with leadership. And I was nobody. Brand new, easily replaceable. The junior coordinator they could fire without consequence. What if they didn't believe me? What if they said I was overreacting, reading too much into friendly messages? What if they accused me of encouraging him, of wanting attention? I'd heard the stories. Women who report harassment and end up blacklisted, labeled as difficult or vindictive. I couldn't risk it. Not when I'd finally gotten my foot in the door. Not when my career was just beginning. So I stayed silent, deleted the messages, tried to avoid being alone with him, made excuses when he suggested coffee or lunch, kept my interactions purely professional, all business, no personal details. But the harassment continued. 6 months of it. Photos, messages, comments that got progressively worse. He started making suggestions. Things he wanted to do with me. Places we could go where nobody would see us. He said his wife didn't understand him, that their relationship was basically over, that he needed someone who got him. Someone young and ambitious and exciting. Someone like me. Every message made my skin crawl. Every notification made my heart race with dread. I stopped sleeping well, started having anxiety attacks. Lost weight because my stomach was constantly in knots. My dream job had become a nightmare, and I didn't know how to escape it without destroying my career. The breaking point came on a Thursday in late September. I was at my aunt's house for dinner. My Aunt Patricia, my mom's older sister, lived in Denver too. We'd always been close. She'd been one of my biggest supporters when I was trying to break into marketing, always encouraging me to keep going when I wanted to give up. We had dinner together once a month, just the two of us, catching up on life. That night, she could tell something was wrong. I was picking at my food, distracted, barely talking. She asked if everything was okay. I said I was fine, just tired from work. She didn't believe me. She asked again, gently. Said I could tell her anything. and something in me just broke. I started crying. Not gentle tears, but the kind where you can't breathe, can't speak. Just sob uncontrollably. She moved to sit next to me, put her arm around me, waited until I could talk. And then I told her everything. The messages, the photos, the months of harassment I'd been hiding, how trapped I felt, how scared I was to report it, how I didn't know what to do. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said she was the regional director at Vanguard Creative. She'd been promoted 6 months ago. She oversaw operations for the entire Denver office. I'd known she worked in marketing, known she'd recently gotten a big promotion, but I hadn't connected the dots. Hadn't realized she was working at the same agency. At a different location, different department, different building even. We'd never discussed specifics about our jobs because we usually talked about family, life, anything but work. But now, sitting in her kitchen, I realized the person I'd been too terrified to report to was family, my aunt, someone who had the power to actually do something, and someone who, based on the look on her face, was absolutely furious about what I'd just told her. She asked if I still had the messages. I nodded, pulled out my phone with shaking hands, showed her, scrolled through months of texts, dozens of photos, explicit messages that got worse and worse. Her jaw tightened. Her face went red. When she looked up at me, her eyes were blazing. She said this was sexual harassment, clear, documented, undeniable. She said she was going to handle it, that I didn't have to be scared anymore, that Jake Morrison would face consequences for what he'd done. I asked her not to say I told her. I was still scared. Still worried about retaliation, about being labeled a snitch, about losing my job. But she shook her head. She said she couldn't ignore this. She wouldn't. This was her responsibility as director. And as my aunt, she'd be damned if she let some predator destroy my career. The next morning, she called an emergency meeting with HR and the executive team. She didn't tell me she was doing it. Didn't want me to panic or try to stop her. I found out later what happened. She walked into that meeting with screenshots of every message Jake had sent me. She laid them out on the conference table and said they had a serious problem. A supervisor was sexually harassing an employee, had been for 6 months, and based on the pattern, this probably wasn't the first time. She demanded an immediate investigation. Full scope. Interview everyone who'd ever worked under Jake Morrison. Check for other complaints. Look for patterns. They tried to downplay it at first. Said it might be a misunderstanding, that they needed to hear Jake's side. She shut that down fast. She said there was no misunderstanding. These were explicit photos sent to a subordinate. Texts propositioning a direct report. Clear violations of company policy and federal law. They could investigate properly, or she'd report it to the EEOC herself and let the agency deal with a federal complaint. They authorized the investigation. Brought in an outside firm to conduct it so there'd be no bias. And that's when everything unraveled. The investigators interviewed me first. Walked through the timeline, documented every message, asked about Jake's behavior at work. It was humiliating. Having to describe in detail every photo, every inappropriate comment, every time I'd felt unsafe. But the investigator was professional, kind even. She said I was brave for coming forward, that what happened wasn't my fault, that I'd done nothing wrong. Then she asked a question that changed everything. She asked if I knew of any other women Jake had harassed. I said I didn't. I'd kept to myself mostly, didn't really know the other coordinators well. But she said they were interviewing everyone who'd worked under Jake in the past 5 years, and if there were other victims, they'd find them. 2 days later, she called me back. Said they'd found something, or rather someone. 3 other women who'd worked as coordinators under Jake. All 3 had left the agency within a year. All 3 had experienced some version of what I'd described. Inappropriate messages, unwanted photos, pressure to engage personally outside of work. One woman, Danielle, said he'd offered to promote her if she went on a trip with him. A work conference that became a thinly veiled proposition for a hotel room. She'd declined, and her performance reviews suddenly tanked. She'd been fired 6 months later for supposedly poor performance. Another woman, Melissa, said he'd cornered her in a supply closet, told her she was too pretty to be stuck in a junior role, said he could help her advance if she was nice to him, touched her waist, her hair. She'd filed an informal complaint with HR at the time, but HR had talked to Jake, he'd denied it, and they'd called it a misunderstanding. Told Melissa to work it out with him directly. She'd quit 2 weeks later. Took a job in another city just to get away from him. A third woman, Rachel, said he'd sent her similar messages and photos. She'd blocked his number. He'd retaliated by cutting her hours, excluding her from projects, making her work life miserable until she finally quit. None of them had pursued legal action. All of them had just wanted to move on, forget, rebuild their careers somewhere else. And then the investigators found the interns. Jake supervised interns every summer. College students, early 20s, desperate for experience and references. Over 5 years, he'd supervised 15 interns. The investigators tracked down 8 of them. 5 reported inappropriate behavior, messages on social media, comments about their appearance, suggestions they go out for drinks after work. One intern, Casey, said he'd kissed her at a company happy hour. She'd been 21, intimidated, unsure how to react. She'd frozen. He'd laughed it off, said she was cute when she was nervous. She'd finished her internship and never applied for jobs in marketing again. Went into teaching instead. Said the experience had ruined the industry for her. The pattern was undeniable. Jake Morrison had been sexually harassing women for at least 5 years. Young women, vulnerable women, women who depended on him for references and career advancement. He'd used his position to prey on them, and when they resisted or reported, he'd retaliate, get them fired or force them out. The agency had failed to stop him. HR had dismissed complaints. Leadership had protected him because he was valuable, because he brought in revenue, because it was easier to lose a junior employee than deal with a messy investigation. But now, with 8 victims willing to testify, with documented evidence spanning years, they couldn't ignore it anymore. Jake was suspended immediately, told not to come into the office, not to contact any current or former employees. The agency's lawyers got involved. They knew they were facing potential lawsuits, multiple claims of harassment and retaliation, failure to provide a safe workplace. They moved into damage control mode, started offering settlements to the women who'd left, trying to avoid a public scandal. But my aunt wasn't interested in covering it up. She pushed for full accountability. Jake needed to be fired, not just quietly let go with a severance package. The company needed to admit fault, implement real policy changes, create actual protections for employees. 2 weeks into the investigation, Jake tried to fight back. He hired a lawyer, claimed the allegations were false, said I'd been flirting with him, that I'd encouraged the messages, that I was making it up because I wanted his job. His lawyer sent a letter to the agency suggesting I was vindictive, that my aunt had a conflict of interest, that this was a conspiracy to get rid of him. It was absurd, offensive, but also terrifying. Because even with all the evidence, even with 8 other victims, he was still trying to flip the narrative, still trying to make himself the victim and us the villains. The agency's lawyers reviewed everything again, my phone records showing I never initiated contact, my lack of responses to his messages, the testimony from other women showing a clear pattern, the informal complaint from Melissa that HR had buried, the intern who'd reported the kiss and been ignored. It was airtight. Jake's claims fell apart under scrutiny, but he wouldn't go quietly. He threatened to sue for wrongful termination, said he'd make this public, drag everyone through the mud. The agency didn't care anymore. They'd seen enough. They fired him, terminated for cause, escorted him out of the building by security on a Wednesday morning. He was furious, yelling about how he'd built the client relationships, how the agency would fail without him, how they'd regret this. But he was gone, finally gone, and then I was offered his job. Senior account manager, supervisor for the coordinator team, nearly double my salary. My aunt called me into her office and told me the executive team wanted to promote me. They said I'd shown courage, integrity, leadership, that I deserved the opportunity. But I could hear what they weren't saying. They were promoting me to cover their asses, to show they supported victims, to avoid looking like they'd just lost a senior manager without a succession plan, and to deal with the optics of me being the regional director's niece. If they didn't promote me, it would look like retaliation. If they did promote me, it would look like nepotism. I didn't know what to do. I wanted the promotion, wanted the recognition, the salary, the validation, but I also knew what people would say, that I only got it because of my aunt, that I'd slept my way up or tattled my way up, that I didn't earn it. The whispers started before I even accepted. Other coordinators suddenly stopped talking to me, gave me cold looks in the break room. Someone left an anonymous note on my desk saying it must be nice to have family connections. The team Jake used to supervise, the people who'd be reporting to me now, were openly skeptical. They'd liked Jake, hadn't seen the harassment, thought I'd gotten him fired out of spite or ambition. My aunt sensed my hesitation. We met for coffee one Saturday. She asked if I was going to take the job. I said I didn't know. Said I was scared of the backlash. Scared people would think I didn't deserve it. She looked at me hard. She said I'd earned that position twice over. First, by surviving 6 months of harassment without quitting. Second, by having the courage to speak up and stop a predator. She said the whispers would happen regardless. People always find reasons to diminish women's achievements. But that didn't make those achievements less real. She asked me what I wanted. Not what was safe or comfortable. What I actually wanted. And the truth was, I wanted that job. Wanted to prove I could do it. Wanted to help rebuild a team culture where harassment wasn't tolerated. I accepted the promotion. Started the following Monday. It was awkward as hell. The coordinators I supervised were cold, suspicious. They tested me constantly. Pushed boundaries, ignored deadlines, questioned my decisions. One guy, Marcus, openly challenged me in a team meeting. Said he didn't understand why I got promoted when I had less experience than everyone else. I could have played it safe, could have made excuses or changed the subject, but I decided to be direct. I said the previous supervisor had been fired for sexually harassing multiple women over 5 years. I said the agency had failed to protect employees and was now trying to do better. I said I understood their skepticism, but that I'd earned my position and would prove it through my work. The room went silent. Marcus looked stunned, but after that meeting, the dynamic shifted. Not everyone liked me, but they respected that I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. Over the next few months, I worked my ass off. Learned everything about client management, team leadership, strategic planning. Took on the most difficult clients. Stayed late solving problems. Checked in with my team constantly. Asked for feedback. Adjusted my approach based on what worked. Slowly, trust built. Coordinators started coming to me with questions, ideas, concerns. We rebuilt the team culture from scratch. Set clear boundaries about communication. No personal texts unless urgent. No after-hours contact unless work-critical. No comments about appearance or personal lives. Just professional, respectful collaboration. It sounds basic, but after years of Jake's boundary violations, we needed those explicit rules. We needed to know what appropriate looked like. The agency implemented broader changes too. Mandatory harassment training for all managers. Anonymous reporting hotline managed by an outside firm. Quarterly surveys about workplace climate. Regular audits of performance reviews to catch patterns of retaliation. And a strict policy that any supervisor accused of harassment would be investigated by external parties, not internal HR. It wasn't perfect. No system is. But it was better. A lot better. And it happened because 8 women were willing to speak up despite the risks. The settlements helped too. The women who'd left the agency got financial compensation. Not huge amounts, but enough to acknowledge the harm they'd suffered. Danielle used hers to start her own consulting business. Melissa went back to school for her MBA. Rachel moved to Portland and took a job at a nonprofit. Casey, the intern who'd been kissed, used her settlement to pay for therapy. She wrote me a letter afterward. Said the investigation and settlement had given her closure, that she'd blamed herself for years, but finally understood it wasn't her fault. That Jake had abused his power and she'd been his victim. That simple acknowledgement, that validation, meant everything to her. As for Jake, he tried to rebuild his career, applied for jobs at other agencies, but word gets around in this industry. People talk, references matter. When potential employers contacted Vanguard, they confirmed he'd been terminated for cause related to harassment. Most places ghosted him after that. Some hired him anyway, apparently thinking they could manage the risk. But 2 years after his firing, I heard he'd been let go from another agency for similar behavior. Turns out predators don't change. They just find new victims. Except now, his pattern was documented. His reputation was ruined. And women were comparing notes, sharing warnings, protecting each other from him. Today, 3 years later, I'm still at Vanguard Creative, still a senior account manager. My team has grown to 6 coordinators, all of whom I've personally hired. I look for talent and integrity over experience. I mentor young women the way I wish I'd been mentored. I teach them about boundaries, about speaking up, about documenting problems before they escalate. I tell them they're allowed to push back on inappropriate behavior regardless of who it's coming from. I promise them they'll be believed and supported if they report harassment. And I mean it. Because I've been where they are. I know how scary it is. How isolating. How easy it is to convince yourself you're overreacting or that fighting back isn't worth the cost. My aunt is still the regional director. We still have dinner once a month. We don't usually talk about work anymore. Too complicated, too intertwined with family. But sometimes we acknowledge what happened. How a family connection that could have been a liability became the thing that saved my career and stopped a predator. She tells me she's proud of me. Not for being related to her, but for being brave, for refusing to stay silent even when silence felt safer. I tell her I couldn't have done it without her, that knowing someone with power believed me made all the difference. We're both right. People still whisper sometimes. Still imply I got ahead because of nepotism. I used to care. Used to want to prove them wrong, defend myself, explain the whole story. Now I just let my work speak for itself. My client retention rate is 97%. My team's satisfaction scores are the highest in the agency. I've been asked to speak at conferences about creating safe workplace cultures. I've mentored a dozen young women through harassment situations at other companies. My reputation isn't based on how I got promoted. It's based on what I've done with the opportunity. But I won't lie and say it was easy. Fighting back cost me friendships, cost me the comfort of flying under the radar, cost me the illusion that if I just worked hard enough, everything would be fine. I learned that hard work isn't enough when you're dealing with someone who abuses power. That silence doesn't protect you. It protects your abuser. That reporting is terrifying but necessary. That you might not win, but you'll definitely lose if you don't try. If you're reading this and you're dealing with workplace harassment, here's what I want you to know. Document everything. Every message, every comment, every incident. Dates, times, exact words, screenshot texts, save emails. Record your memories immediately after incidents. That documentation will be your strongest weapon. Find your people. You're probably not alone. Harassers are repeat offenders. Talk to former employees, interns, anyone who worked with your harasser. Build a pattern. Get legal advice. Find an employment attorney who handles harassment cases. Many offer free consultations. Know your rights before you report. Understand the risks and protections. Tell someone you trust, whether it's family, a friend, a mentor, or a therapist. You need support. This process will drain you. You can't do it alone. And remember, the outcome isn't entirely in your control. Some companies protect harassers. Some investigations are sham. Some victims fight and still lose their jobs. That's the brutal reality. But fighting back gives you power. It says you won't be silent. It creates a record. It warns future victims. It plants seeds that might protect someone else even if they didn't protect you. Justice isn't guaranteed, but it's possible. And possibility is worth fighting for. I think about that Tuesday night sometimes. Sitting in my dark bedroom, staring at another disgusting message from Jake. feeling trapped and helpless. I wish I could go back and tell that version of me what would happen. That she'd find the courage to speak up. That she'd discover she wasn't alone. That the family connection she thought was a weakness would become her strength. That in 3 years she'd be supervising a team, mentoring young women, building the culture she'd wished existed. That she'd survive. That she'd win. But maybe she already knew. Maybe that's why she kept those messages instead of deleting them forever. Maybe that's why she finally broke down and told her aunt. Maybe somewhere deep down she knew silence wasn't sustainable. That eventually, you have to choose between protecting yourself and protecting your abuser. And she chose herself. That choice changed everything. You can make that choice too. It won't be easy. It might not work out the way you hope, but you deserve a workplace where you feel safe. Where your boss doesn't send you photos you didn't ask for. Where your career advancement isn't contingent on tolerating abuse. You deserve respect, dignity, and the chance to succeed based on your merit. Not everyone will believe you. Not every fight ends in victory, but your voice matters. Your experience matters. And you're stronger than you think. Trust me, I know.